What if I told you that Adam and Eve were never alone? That even before humanity took its first breath, other consciousnesses silently walked through Eden, observing, guiding, protecting, and sometimes intervening. Ancient, forbidden, and forgotten texts speak of beings who were not angels, but also not human. Creatures that existed between worlds, living between light and matter, witnessing the awakening of our species. Today, you will discover who these beings were, and why the story of Eden is much bigger and much more dangerous than you've been told. Have you ever imagined that the Garden of Eden might not have been the quiet, solitary place you were taught? That, even before Adam and Eve understood who they were, something or somebody, were you already walking among the invisible layers of that sacred garden? This question is unsettling because it challenges the traditional narrative. But stay with me, because what you're about to discover may surprise you far more than you expect. Gnostic texts, apocryphal manuscripts, and little-discussed spiritual traditions describe Eden as a living, pulsating, multidimensional space. Not just a physical garden, but a vibrant kingdom, where different levels of existence overlapped like translucent veils. The idea that Adam and Eve were placed there alone, observed only by God and the angels, is a simplistic, almost childish, view compared to the spiritual richness that these ancient sources reveal. Imagine for a moment that Eden functioned as a portal of consciousness, a place where light and matter had not yet completely separated, where spiritual beings moved from one plane to another with the ease with which we change environments today. And now consider, if this realm was so vast, so deep, and so layered, why would only humans be there? Have you ever felt that there is something more between the visible and the invisible world? Have you ever had that feeling that we are not alone, even when everything seems silent? I ask this because, according to different spiritual traditions, this ancestral perception began precisely there, in Eden. It is as if the first human awakening occurred surrounded by presences that we barely remember today. Some manuscripts describe these beings as intermediary entities. They were not angels, but neither were they human. Creatures of elevated consciousness, made of condensed light, subtle form, and specific purpose. They were called observers, instructors, guardians of the transition, beings that existed between worlds. Their presence in Eden was not a threat, but part of the original plan, to accompany the birth of human consciousness. A consciousness that was still in its infancy, but which carried the potential to become something immense. And when you realize this, the inevitable question arises: why was this truth erased? Why, for centuries, were we taught that Eden was inhabited only by God, angels, and two humans? What was so disturbing about the idea that the first humans were not alone? Many scholars of Gnosticism argue that these entities were hidden because they symbolized something profound and dangerous. Human awakening guided by spiritual intelligences that do not answer to traditional religious authority. Eden, in this view, was not an empty stage. It was a divine laboratory, a field of initiation, a place where multiple forms of spiritual life coexisted. As you listen to this, you might feel a slight unease, or perhaps an old curiosity will awaken within you. Has it ever happened to you, at some point in your life, that something was watching, guiding, or inspiring you, even without a clear explanation? For many, this feeling is an echo of those forgotten times, the echoes of Eden. And the more we delve into these accounts, the more we realize that everything we've learned about the beginning of humanity has only been the surface. There are hidden layers, pages torn out, truths left aside because they could completely change how we understand our spiritual origin, our evolution, and even our purpose. And it is precisely when we look at these hidden presences, these intermediary beings that inhabited Eden, that we begin to see a much larger story. And to understand who these beings really were, and why they were there, we need to delve a little deeper into the next part. And when we enter these deeper layers of Eden, it's impossible not to feel that something within us responds to this ancient calling, as if recognizing a forgotten memory. Many people report this feeling of familiarity, as if these silenced truths touch a part of the soul that never stopped knowing. And if in some way you are also feeling this now, this inner vibration, this awakening curiosity, I want to invite you to share. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what resonated with you, what sparked your interest, or even what seemed strange to you. Your perspective can help others see this issue from a new angle, and these dialogues create a real community among those seeking the same path. This is how new questions, new connections, and even new discoveries arise. And if you're here, diving with me into this deeper vision of Eden, please like the video. It may seem like a small gesture, but it makes a huge difference in helping this message reach more people who are also seeking meaning, awareness, and hidden knowledge. Each like pushes this content further, allowing these stories to finally emerge from the shadows. And of course, if you feel that this type of content speaks to your soul, subscribe to the channel. This shows that you want to continue walking together, exploring each layer, each mystery, each forgotten truth. It is your presence here that keeps this space alive, and it is thanks to you that we can continue to bring up topics that almost no one dares to address. Stay with me, because as we delve deeper into these intermediary beings of Eden, we begin to realize that the story is not only bigger, it's much more intimate than it seems. There's something in these accounts that speaks directly to the human essence. And that leads us to the next point, where everything begins to gain unexpected clarity. When we speak of these other inhabitants of Eden, we are not talking about abstract or merely symbolic figures, but about a true third order of existence. They were not angels in the classical sense, with open wings and a clearly defined mission, nor were they humans made of flesh, doubt, and history. They were something between these two extremes, beings of acute consciousness, made of condensed light, with the strange ability to touch the material world without fully belonging to it. In many traditions, they appear as silent guardians, in others, as messengers who whisper uncomfortable truths, in some, as instructors who closely accompany humanity's first steps. Imagine for a moment the scene. Adam and Eve walking through a garden that is simultaneously landscape and temple, nature and spiritual school. They are still discovering their own bodies, their own emotions, their own capacity to choose. And in the distance, or perhaps beside them, there are consciousnesses observing every gesture, every decision, every change of mindset. It is not a cold control, but a kind of loving supervision, like watching a child learning to walk. These intermediary beings are described as witnesses to our spiritual birth, as if they were there to ensure that the journey is not completely lost in ignorance. Some Gnostic texts speak of observers, entities that contemplated humanity with a mixture of curiosity and responsibility. They saw humanity as a fragile creation, but with an almost dangerous potential. The capacity to surpass limits, to access a hidden truth that not all spiritual powers wanted to see awakened. And it is here that the story begins to take on a behind-the-scenes air of creation, as if Eden were the stage for a silent conflict between keeping humankind obedient or allowing it to become fully conscious. These third-order beings were not neutral. In many accounts, some leaned more towards compassion, wanting to help, guide, and accelerate transformation. Others, more rigid, feared the impact of this awakening, as if humanity might cross doors that should never be opened. It's almost like witnessing the internal conflict of someone who loves, but is afraid to see the other grow too much. From this tension, many of the narratives that were later simplified into myth or doctrine were born, losing nuances, layers, and contradictions. If you carefully observe the symbolism of these stories, you will realize that the presence of these intermediaries always appears linked to moments of decision. Not only the choice of whether or not to eat the forbidden fruit, but the choice to listen to certain voices, follow certain intuitions, and distrust certain orders. Spirituality, in this scenario, is not a rigid script but a field of possibilities. The human being is not a puppet, he is a learner. And these beings between worlds function as mirrors and swords. They reflect what we can become and, at the same time, cut through the illusions that keep us small. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and invite you to look at these beings not as monsters, demons, or perfect saviors, but as consciousnesses in process, just like us. In many mystical traditions, they appear as entities that are also learning, that are also on a journey. They may have more light, more clarity, more power than the average human, but they are still not the absolute source. They are intermediaries both in space and in the spiritual hierarchy itself. This changes everything, because it breaks that childish view that there is a completely good side and a completely evil side, and invites us to see layers, nuances, gray areas that are rarely mentioned in sermons. When ancient texts describe these beings whispering secrets, delivering fragments of knowledge, or offering symbols that forever change human perception, they are not merely speaking of a magical scene. They are speaking of an initiation process. Humanity, there in Eden, was in the background of its own history, receiving subtle nudges toward a broader consciousness. It's like when, in our lives, something seemingly small, a dream, a conversation, an encounter, triggers a giant inner shift. From that moment on, you can never see the world the same way again, and reality itself seems to take on a new form. These intermediary figures represent precisely this turning point. They emerge where doubt is great, where the decision is weighty, where the old mentality can no longer explain what is happening. And this doesn't belong only to the mythical past. How many times in your own journey have you felt as if you were being observed by something greater, as if a kind of silent intelligence were orchestrating encounters, coincidences, opportunities for awakening? For many, this is not just psychology. It is spirituality in action. It is an invitation to a transformation that goes beyond religion and touches the deep structure of the soul. The hidden truth behind the presence of these beings in Eden is that humanity was never left entirely alone, but neither was it ever entirely controlled. There was always room for choices, for mistakes, for falls and new beginnings. There was always a certain risk. And perhaps that is precisely what makes this story so powerful. It is not a children's tale about obedience and punishment, but a profound account of responsibility, freedom, and inner transformation. When you begin to look at Eden in this light, the figures of these guardians, messengers, and instructors take on a different hue. They cease to be distant characters and become symbols of something that remains active to this day. Forces that push us forward, but also resistances that try to keep us within the known. It is the duel between the comfort of ignorance and the discomfort of truth. It is the precise point where our decisions shape not only the future, but also how we perceive reality, how we deal with fear, and how we open ourselves to new revelations. And if all of this resonates with you in some way, perhaps it's because this isn't just a story about the beginning of the world, but about the beginning of each individual awakening. Every time you question, every time you feel that something doesn't fit in the official narrative, it's as if those echoes of Eden are calling back. As if those intermediary beings of light and mystery are drawing near once more, waiting to see what choice you will make now, what mindset you will nurture, what truth you are willing to face. Perhaps, deep down, the big question isn't just who is in Eden, but who is walking with you today in the invisible spaces of your life. When you allow yourself to look at your own journey with this broader perspective, you realize that not everything is entirely random. There are encounters that seem planned, phrases that arrive at the right time, dreams that insist on returning, like small reminders that something is closely following your process. If this vision affected you in any way, comment below. I feel like we're not alone. When we begin to accept the possibility that Adam and Eve were not alone, something profoundly changes in how we perceive Eden. Suddenly, that garden ceases to be a static setting and transforms into a living space, full of movement, intention, and purpose. Gnostic texts and apocryphal writings have always left clues that these intermediary beings were not there as mere spectators, but as an essential part of the human awakening process. And when we look at it from this angle, everything takes on a new dimension. Nothing was accidental, nothing was superfluous, nothing was out of place. Eden functioned almost like a great school of consciousness, and these beings were part of the pedagogical structure of that beginning. Consider for a moment the mindset of early humans: nascent curiosity, raw perception, raw emotions, and an immense capacity for transformation. If humanity was so new, so sensitive, and so promising, why would it be completely alone? It makes much more sense to imagine that there were presences nearby, not to control, but to guide, test, provoke, protect at the right moments, and withdraw when necessary. This combination of distance and proximity is precisely what appears in mystical accounts. Beings who observed, but who also influenced key decisions. They were not angels in the traditional sense, nor material entities like us. They were something between worlds, part light, part intention, part mystery. In this interpretation, Eden was more than a garden. It was an initiation chamber. A place where human consciousness would be shaped not by long speeches, but by experiences. And these experiences needed architects, beings capable of adjusting the scenarios, creating encounters, igniting questions, and provoking reflection. Not in the sense of manipulation, but of stimulation. Humanity would learn nothing if it lived in a permanent state of comfort, and these intermediary beings seemed to know this. They created conditions for Adam and Eve to develop something essential: the capacity to choose. And when we talk about choice, we're talking about something much bigger than obeying or disobeying an order. We're talking about facing internal dilemmas, questioning established truths, confronting one's own curiosity. These are the elements that form personality, identity, and a sense of freedom. In any spiritual journey, not just in the stories of Eden, there is a moment when the seeker needs to decide what kind of person they want to become. And these intermediary beings were there precisely to challenge this process, so that humanity would not remain in a naive, complacent, infantilized state. They were part of the mechanism that would propel humankind towards self-knowledge. When we delve deeper, we realize that the purpose of these beings was not to interfere in human destiny, but to ensure that awakening was possible. Without tension, without questions, without challenges, no real transformation happens. Life does this to us even today. It places situations that force us to grow, change our mindset, reconsider old beliefs, abandon behaviors that no longer serve us. And if this happens now, why wouldn't it have happened in the beginning? Eden was not a static paradise. It was the setting for a journey of maturation. And these beings were the silent tutors of this journey. In the Gnostic view, humanity was not created to exist in isolation. Isolation is a fall, not an origin. The initial plan involved coexistence with different types of consciousness, dialogue with multiple levels of reality, interaction with dimensions that we barely remember exist today. These intermediaries represented precisely this bridge. They made visible, or semi-visible, the truth that creation is much broader than we perceive. They were, in themselves, a kind of living reminder that reality has layers, and that the surface never tells the whole story. And when we think about it, something profound is revealed. If presences existed around us from the beginning, it means we were never completely left to chance. Even when everything seemed silent, there was subtle guidance. Even when it seemed that humanity was completely lost, there was a spark, an impulse, an incentive. These beings were not saviors. They didn't prevent mistakes, they didn't erase consequences, they didn't offer easy shortcuts. But they kept a crack open, a small light, a fragment of hidden truth, an intuition that pushed consciousness forward. And this pattern repeats itself in our lives today. There's always a moment when something, an encounter, a dream, an unexpected phrase, pulls us out of our comfort zone. And suddenly, choices that were previously invisible become apparent. What seemed static rearranges itself. A silent revelation emerges that changes the course of the journey. Perhaps that's why these old stories remain so vivid. They speak of us. They speak of the transitions we've already experienced, the challenges we've faced, the decisions that shape who we've become. When we view Eden as a school for the soul, the intermediary beings cease to seem intrusive and become an essential part of the narrative. They were there because humanity needed encounters that provoked awareness. It needed boundaries that revealed desire. It needed dialogues, visible or invisible, that ignited the spark of perception. Humanity would never learn if treated like a puppet. Therefore, these beings observed, tested, provoked, and at the same time respected free will. And if this vision truly resonates with you, perhaps it's because, in some way, you also recognize that your own story has signs, encounters, and challenges that seem to have been placed there for a purpose. Just like in Eden, there's always something subtly accompanying us, reminding us that the journey is never just external. It's profoundly internal, full of layers that gradually reveal themselves. If this perspective resonated with you, comment below. I can see the purpose behind the tests. When we talk about the purpose of these beings in Eden, there comes a point where the question stops being, why were they there? And becomes, what happened when Adam and Eve realized they weren't alone? Because it's one thing for a silent spiritual structure to exist around them. It's quite another, completely different, moment when consciousness awakens and realizes, there's something more here. This moment of first contact is a watershed, both in the symbolic history of humanity and in the inner journey of each of us. Imagine Adam walking through the garden at dawn. The air is still damp, the light filtering through the leaves as if the sky itself were pouring a secret upon the earth. He knows that path, he has walked it countless times, but that morning something seems different. There is a silence that is not empty, it is a charged silence full of presence. It's like when you enter a place and feel that someone has been there before you, even without seeing anyone. The body perceives before the mind, the spirit perceives before words. The transformation begins at this subtle point. Mystical texts describe this type of moment with images of condensing light, figures that appear human but possess a glow that does not belong to this world. It is not an ordinary encounter. It is not like meeting another person. It is like being seen by something that pierces your mask, your defenses, your excuses. The hitherto innocent mindset of Adam and Eve begins to be challenged. They are not merely in a garden. They are in the background of creation, being observed by consciousnesses that understand far more than they do about the impact of human decisions. Some traditions describe voices that speak without mouths, words that are not heard by the ears but received directly into the mind. It's like a silent revelation, knowledge that simply emerges whole, as if it had always been there, waiting to be noticed. He imagines the shock and, at the same time, the strange familiarity. Fear and attraction mixed together. On one hand, the feeling of total vulnerability upon realizing that someone sees everything. On the other, the intuition that this someone is not an enemy, but a kind of spiritual instructor. Now I want to delve even deeper into this scenario and invite you to visualize Adam and Eve feeling, for the first time, that their thoughts are not as private as they imagined. Not in the sense of invasion, but in the sense of transparency. These intermediary beings, made of light and consciousness, did not communicate only with phrases or gestures. They transmitted states, expanded perception, ignited questions that changed the way the first humans looked at themselves, at the garden, at the Creator himself. It was as if someone pulled back the curtain of a theater, and suddenly, the stage revealed that there is an audience, a direction, a larger story unfolding. In some apocryphal descriptions, these figures approach like columns of light that gradually take shape. From a distance, they appear as just an intense glow. As they draw closer, the light molds itself, assuming a semi-human form. Face, shoulders, hands, yet still with something indecipherable. The skin seems made of brightness, the eyes resemble embers, the voice sounds like wind within the mind. It is no coincidence that so many ancient cultures associate these encounters with reverent fear. It is not the dread of danger, but the impact of the hidden truth being revealed all at once. This first encounter is not just a mystical event. It's a turning point in their mindset. Until then, Adam and Eve lived in an almost automatic state, following the flow of creation without needing to question much. From this encounter, something similar to what we feel when we awaken to a deeper level of consciousness is born within them, a mixture of curiosity and restlessness. Why are they here? What do they want? What exists that I don't yet know? The journey ceases to be merely external, tending the garden, and becomes internal, addressing their own questions. Think about how many times in your life you've had the feeling that something called you from within. It might have been a recurring dream, a series of coincidences, a phrase that arrived at just the right time. For many people, this type of experience is an echo of that first contact. It's as if reality is whispering, "Wake up, there's more happening than you're seeing." In Eden, this whisper manifested itself through these intermediary beings. They were the living reminder that reality doesn't end with what the eyes can see. The most interesting thing is that these encounters, according to some accounts, didn't always happen in a dramatic way. It wasn't always a great flash in the sky or an overwhelming vision. Sometimes it was just a subtle change in the atmosphere, a perception of being guided to look at a specific tree, to reflect on a word, to reconsider a decision. The spirituality of Eden was less about spectacular miracles and more about fine-tuning perception. Small revelations that, added together, completely redefine the meaning of existence. And that's precisely where the story takes on even deeper dimensions. Because from the moment Adam and Eve realize they are not alone, every decision takes on a different weight. It's not just choosing one path or another within a beautiful garden. It's choosing which inner voice you will listen to, which influence you will allow to shape your worldview. It's like in our lives. There are always forces, ideas, people, and experiences vying for space within our minds. The first contact with these beings marks the beginning of spiritual responsibility. It's no longer possible to live on autopilot. If you look closely, you'll realize that this type of narrative doesn't just speak of the past, but of our own journey of transformation. Whenever life confronts us with something that exposes our contradictions, our shadows, our escapes, it's as if we're facing a new apparition, a new call to consciousness. Sometimes this comes in the form of pain, crisis, or loss. Other times, it comes as a powerful insight, a sudden understanding that changes everything. In all cases, there's this feeling that a boundary has been crossed. And just as in Eden, the question continues to echo. What do you do after realizing you're not alone? After realizing there's a dimension of reality that observes you, inspires you, tests you, and invites you to grow? The answer isn't readily available. It arises from the choices you make, from how you deal with the revelations that come, from the courage to face the hidden truth you previously avoided. If all of this has sparked something within you, write in the comments. I recognize the signs on my journey. When we look at Adam and Eve's first contact with invisible presences, the figure of the serpent inevitably enters the scene. For centuries, it has been used as the absolute symbol of temptation, deception, and the fall. But if we truly take seriously the idea that Eden was a school of consciousness, a space for spiritual initiation, does it make sense to see the serpent only as an enemy? Or does it carry a much more complex role, almost like a messenger between worlds, challenging humanity's childish mentality to provoke a profound transformation? In many Gnostic readings, the serpent does not appear as a crawling monster driven by a desire for destruction, but as a being of elevated consciousness, linked to wisdom, knowledge, and revelation. It emerges at the critical point of the journey, at the exact place where the story changes course, before the tree of knowledge. It is no coincidence that this scene was painted with such weight. At stake was not only obedience to an external order, but the kind of decisions humanity would be willing to make about its own destiny. To accept living in the safety of ignorance, or to risk everything for a hidden truth that could change everything. Imagine the atmosphere of that encounter. Adam and Eve had already sensed they were not alone, had already perceived the echoes of other spiritual presences in the garden. The air was already heavy with mystery, with unanswered questions. And it is precisely in this context that the serpent approaches. It doesn't arrive with shouts, it doesn't appear violently. It arrives with a question. And questions often have more impact than commandments. Because a well-placed question opens a breach within the mind, shifts structures, and alters how a person perceives reality. The serpent gazes at what no one wants to face, the imposed limit, the forbidden tree. The don't touch, the don't question, the don't cross this line. How many times, in our own journey, does the turning point happen precisely when someone makes us look at the limit we accept without thinking? A belief, a fear, a ready-made narrative about who we are. The serpent, as a symbol, represents this provocative force that asks you, is that all there is to it? Is that the whole story? And it is at this moment that consciousness begins to move from passive mode and enters the territory of conscious choice. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject and invite you to realize that in various spiritual and esoteric traditions, the serpent is also a symbol of awakening energy, of rising power, of wisdom ascending from the base to the heights. It is linked to the transformation of the mind, to a change of mentality, to the passage from innocence to responsibility. This does not mean that everything it represents is good or comfortable. Quite the contrary. What the serpent offers is dangerous in the best sense of the word. Dangerous to ignorance, to blind submission, to the illusion that it is possible to grow without facing one's own shadow. When the serpent questions the order it has received, it is not simply trying to overthrow God, as many simplifications put it. It is pressing humanity to look inward and decide what kind of relationship it wants to have with the divine. A relationship based solely on obedience or one marked by awareness, responsibility, and active participation. It is as if it were saying, do you want to remain spiritual children, or do you want to take the risk of becoming co-creators of your own journey? This is a hidden truth behind the scenes that is rarely mentioned. If we observe carefully, the serpent acts as the bridge between everything we've discussed so far. the intermediary beings of Eden, the hidden purpose of creation, the first contact with invisible presences. It condenses everything into a single gesture, a single dialogue. It is the voice that traverses worlds. It knows something of the light and sees the limitations of matter. It converses with humanity and points to a greater reality. This is why so many mystics have associated it with the figure of the messenger between planes, someone who doesn't belong entirely to one side or the other, but walks on the border. This perspective isn't asking you to worship the serpent or accept any narrative without thinking. The invitation here is different, to look at the symbol with spiritual maturity. Instead of seeing only the character of the villain who ruined everything, realize how much this scene speaks of choices, revelations, and the impact a single act can have on an entire timeline. The fruit is not just an object. It marks a decision, to remain in a comfortable yet limited paradise, or to cross a portal that exposes behind-the-scenes events, conflicts, responsibilities, and pains that were previously hidden. And if we're honest, this is a tension that remains alive within us to this day. At many points in life, something within us prefers the safe illusion. Another part desires the truth, even if it hurts. The serpent, as an archetype, represents precisely this uncomfortable call that says, if you truly want to awaken, you can't keep pretending you don't see. It doesn't promise ease. It doesn't speak of a path without losses. It speaks of lucidity. And lucidity, in the true spiritual journey, always demands a price. The price of giving up comfortable stories to embrace a broader, rawer, and at the same time freer vision. Understanding the serpent as a messenger between worlds doesn't mean denying the conflict, the pain, or the consequences of what happened afterward. It means recognizing that, at that moment, something was placed before humanity, the chance to emerge from spiritual infancy. And this resonates in every transformation we experience. Whenever you choose to confront a pattern, break a dependency, question a lie you yourself have nurtured for years, there is a serpentine energy moving there, challenging the old and opening space for a new version of yourself. And there's an important detail. By reinterpreting the serpent in this way, the narrative of Eden itself ceases to be merely a story of guilt and punishment and becomes a symbolic map of the evolution of consciousness. It stops being a tale about an irreparable mistake and becomes a mirror of the phases of our own inner journey. The state of comfort, the challenge, the doubt, the fall of illusions, the pain, the maturation, and finally, the possibility of a more genuine relationship with the sacred. None of this cancels out responsibility, but it deepens the understanding of what was really at stake behind the scenes of that scene. Perhaps, in the end, the great scandal of this story is not the existence of the serpent, but the fact that it placed the possibility of decision in human hands. And that is revolutionary. It restores responsibility, removes the burden of blaming only external factors, and reminds us that, from the beginning, the spiritual journey involves risk, courage, and a willingness to cross portals from which there is no return. On one side, comfort. On the other, revelations that change everything. If this look at the snake sparked something in you, comment below. I choose the truth, even if it hurts. When the serpent enters the scene as a messenger between worlds and humanity decides to taste knowledge, something invisible breaks in the fabric of Eden. Until that moment, light seemed to fill everything homogeneously, as if there were no real distance between the creator, creatures, and this intermediate plane of spiritual beings. But after that decision, the atmosphere changes. It is not merely an external punishment, as if an angry authority had decided to impose a penalty. It is as if the very vibration of the place responded to the new mentality of Adam and Eve. The awakening of consciousness brings with it a price. The end of naivete, the beginning of responsibility, and with it, the birth of separation. Many mystical texts describe this transition as a withdrawal of the light. Not in the sense that God abandoned creation, but that the form of his presence changed. Before, the light was almost overwhelming, evident, unquestionable. Afterward, it becomes more subtle, more indirect, more difficult to perceive. It is as if, behind the scenes, the different spiritual orders that inhabited Eden came into tension. Some of these intermediary beings saw in the human choice a necessary step towards transformation. Others, however, saw in it a kind of rebellion, a dangerous deviation, a rupture of the original harmony. Imagine this scene from a more symbolic perspective. On one side, consciences that believe true love includes freedom, risk, and authentic decisions. On the other, consciences that believe keeping everything under control is the best way to preserve order. At the center of this silent conflict, humanity, newly awakened, is confused and in shock at the consequences of its own choice. What was once a cozy garden now seems burdened with weight. The colors remain the same, but the perception changes. The light is still there, but something prevents it from being felt in the same way. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject and invite you to realize that this fall is not just an external event, but an internal change of state. Before, Adam and Eve lived in unity. Unity with the environment, with the divine, with their own being. After awakening, division arises within themselves. Conflict emerges between what they feel and what they know, between desire and fear, between the hidden truth they intuit and the official narrative they have always heard. This is where duality begins, good and evil, right and wrong, light and shadow. Not because these things didn't exist before, but because now consciousness has come to perceive them separately. This reaction from the divine, often described as withdrawal, can be seen from another angle. It's like when a spiritual master takes a step back so that the disciple can test, in practice, what they have learned. If the teacher is constantly holding the student's hand, there is no real growth. By withdrawing the intensity of the light, the Creator opens space for humanity to experience its own freedom, feel the impact of its own decisions, and understand, through the results, the weight of its own journey. This does not negate the pain, but gives it a deeper meaning. If we apply this to our lives, it becomes easier to understand. How many times has a phase of apparent abandonment actually been the beginning of a more mature stage in your journey? That moment when you no longer felt immediate answers, such clear signs, such obvious coincidences. Instead, silence, doubts, pain, apparent losses arose. And later, looking back, you realized that it was precisely there that your inner self reorganized, that your vision expanded, that you stopped living on autopilot. The feeling of separation, however distressing it may be, is often the setting where consciousness deepens. In Eden, this feeling takes shape when Adam and Eve realize they can no longer be in the direct presence of the same light as before. They hide, they feel shame, they feel fear. Not because the Creator has become less loving, but because now they see themselves differently. Their self-image shatters. Guilt arises, comparison arises, judgment arises. The mind, which once lived in stillness, is now full of voices. And part of this agitation is the result of the clash between what they were and what they began to realize they could be. In spiritual terms, this marks the beginning of a long journey of reconciliation. Humanity begins to walk between two poles, the memory of a lost unity and the reality of a present duality. This is fertile ground for all the great questions of philosophy, spirituality, and psychology. Who am I? Why do I feel separated? How do I get back home? The divine reaction, presented as distancing, functions almost like a mirror placed at a distance. Instead of being pressed against your face, it is positioned further away so that you can see the whole picture, including what you would prefer not to see. Other surrounding spiritual orders are also affected by this change. The dynamic between intermediary beings and humanity is transformed. Those who once observed from above now need to deal with a world in turmoil. Some become discreet allies, offering inspiration and courage at the right times. Others, perhaps trapped in the ideal of control, see humanity as a threat, a mistake, a risk to cosmic balance. It is as if the universe itself needs to readjust its relationship with this new being that dared to cross boundaries. This tension between proximity and distance, between light and shadow, between grace and responsibility, has been at the heart of the human experience ever since. And however much the narrative of the fall has been used to generate fear, guilt, and submission, there is another possible perspective: that this was the beginning of a journey of spiritual maturation. A journey in which the light hides not to punish, but to be consciously sought. Not to deny love, but to invite humankind to become a partner in this love, and not merely a passive recipient. When you realize this, the story of Eden ceases to be merely about a past mistake and begins to speak of the present. It speaks of each time you feel the light fading a little, and you need to decide whether to surrender to the feeling of abandonment or use that emptiness as an impetus for a deeper dive into yourself. It speaks of the phases in which everything seems dark, but silently, your soul is reorganizing itself to receive a level of truth and revelations that you could not previously bear. Ultimately, the light doesn't disappear. It changes location. It leaves an external setting and begins to be perceived, little by little, within you. This is the great turning point that many traditions try to highlight. What was once experienced as an inevitable presence now needs to be discovered as an inner flame. And it is precisely in this change that duality gains meaning. Without contrast, there is no perception. Without night, there is no awareness of day. Without apparent distance, there is no desire for reunion. If this vision of the light receding but remaining present on another level resonated with your story, write in the comments. I am learning from separation. When we look closely at this idea of the light receding and the separation that arises in the human heart, it becomes almost inevitable to ask a question. If all this began back there, in Eden, did it end there? Or does this story, in some mysterious way, continue to echo within us today, in our decisions, our fears, our silent spiritual searches? Because the truth is that, behind every doctrine, every religion, every philosophy, there is always the same background scenario. A human being trying to cope with the feeling of being separated from something greater, and at the same time, feeling that this something continues to call. This is where the echoes of Eden begin to become very clear. They don't just appear in ancient texts, esoteric symbols, or secret rituals. They appear on nights when you feel an emptiness that nothing material can fill. They appear in that moment when you look at your own life and think, it can't be just this. They arise when you feel that your journey has an invisible backdrop, as if everything that happens on the surface is connected to something deeper happening within you. This restlessness, which sometimes hurts, is one of the strongest signs that Eden is not just a place of the past, but a state of consciousness that continues to influence humanity. If you pay attention, the search for spirituality today has much in common with the experience of Adam and Eve after their awakening. People try to rebuild a connection with the divine, but now from a place of duality, distance, and fragmentation. Meditations, therapies, religions, philosophy, depth psychology, all of this, in some way, is an effort to mend a tear, to bring together inner parts that have separated. It's as if each person is trying to find their way back to a kind of lost unity, even without being able to explain exactly in words what they are looking for. This desire is a direct echo of that first rupture. And it's not just spiritual practices that reveal this. Our stories, films, series, and music are full of metaphors about falling and redemption, about loss and reunion, about characters who discover that the world they live in is only a superficial layer of a much broader reality. How many narratives tell of heroes who uncover lies, blow up systems, cross portals, and break with the official version of history. All of this speaks to the same wound. The feeling that there is a hidden truth about who we are and about what is really happening behind the visible stage of life. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic and touch on a point that many people feel but rarely put into words. The impression that we are not making this journey alone. Just as in Eden there were intermediary beings, consciousnesses that observed and sometimes intervened, many traditions today speak of spiritual guides, mentors, angels, energies, fields of information that influence our path. Each line gives it a different name, interprets it in a different way, creates its own images. But, at its core, the intuition is the same. Perhaps there are intelligences between the human and the absolute divine, accompanying our evolution. This doesn't mean that everything that happens is manipulated or decided by invisible forces. Quite the contrary. Just like in Eden, freedom remains a central element. What changes is the perception that our choices resonate in broader layers of reality, and that, at certain moments in the journey, it seems that life conspires to place specific people, signs, and situations in our path. That book that arrives at the right time, that phrase you needed to hear, that improbable synchronicity that makes you think. This can't just be a coincidence. These are the small echoes, the small clues that there is a silent dialogue happening between you and something greater. Perhaps these intermediary beings no longer appear to us as visible pillars of light, as described in ancient texts. Perhaps their form of manifestation has changed to adapt to the mentality of our time. Instead of dramatic visions in the sky, they may manifest as profound intuitions, as dreams laden with meaning, as that feeling of protection on a day when everything could have gone very wrong. It's as if the universe continues to use messengers, but now speaks in a more subtle language, mixed with our psychology, with our ability to interpret symbols and signs. If you look closely at your own history, you might recognize moments when something seemed to pull you back onto the path, even when rationally you had already given up. A decision that changed the course of everything, a spark of awareness that made you abandon a destructive path, a revelation that simply fell upon you without logical explanation. These are concrete examples of how the echoes of Eden still act today, not as a distant tale, but as a living pattern of transformation. And there's another important point: the feeling of exile, of not belonging, that so many people carry. That impression of being strange to the world, of not fully fitting into the rules, rhythms, and expectations of society. In many spiritual traditions, this is seen as a sign of remembrance of origin, a trace of the memory that our home is not just this material plane. It's as if the soul carries deep down a nostalgia for Eden, not in the sense of returning and undoing everything, but in the sense of remembering that we were made for something more than just surviving, working, consuming, and repeating patterns. When you see the myth of Eden as a metaphor, it ceases to be a record of an ancestral mistake and transforms into a map of the human journey. Awakening, separation, fear, the search, the inner calling, encounters with invisible forces, choices that change the course of history. All of this is present in your life, here and now. What changes is how you interpret it. You can look at your own pain as mere punishment, as bad luck, as the cruelty of fate. Or you can begin to see these moments as portals of transformation, as opportunities for expanding consciousness that echo that first step taken long ago. Ultimately, what these stories remind us is that we are not merely spectators of a pre-written narrative. We are also the authors, the interpreters, the travelers on this journey. The echoes of Eden continue to resonate whenever you feel there is something more, that your soul yearns for depth, that your life yearns for truth. And as long as that calling remains within you, the story continues to unfold. If all of this resonated with what you feel deep down, leave a comment saying, "I still hear the echoes of Eden." Before we wrap up, I want to speak directly to you who have stayed with me this far. If this content brought you any clarity, any expansion of mindset, or even that silent feeling of "I needed to hear this today," then it makes sense to continue this journey together. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next parts, because everything we explore here is built step by step, always delving a little deeper into these layers of consciousness that almost no one dares to touch. And if you've made it to the end, leave a comment below with this phrase: "I keep waking up. That way I know you were with me until the very last second, and that this message truly found a place within you." If you'd like to leave a like, do it now. It's simple, but it creates a real connection between the speaker and the listener, and it also helps this type of content reach other people who are also on this silent quest. And of course, if you want to delve deeper into this topic, there's a video right here that perfectly complements this conversation. Click and continue with me there. The journey is only just beginning.